Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bantamweight Boxing Podcast. Pound for pound, the best boxing podcast around. Joined with me, as always, are my three brothers, Joe, Jim, and Johan. Say hello, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening, everyone.
In this episode, we're going to be looking at some of the major events in the boxing world. And stay tuned towards the end where we'll be talking about the controversial topic of whether the sport, or not the sport, well, the sport of MMA and the UFC in particular are overtaking our much beloved sport of boxing. Anyway, let's get into the podcast and let's kickstart with Big Baby Miller. Gerald Miller, as most of us know now, has tested positive for steroids for a second time in his career. He's been pulled out of his fight with Jerry Forrest, and Forrest has come out and said that he should be banned for life after his PED use. What do you make of this, Joe? How should Miller be punished? Because clearly that first suspension has not worked.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a lifetime ban from boxing for me. I think what shocks me is that in a lot of sports, you sort of get quite a few drugs cheats here and there. So you've got like Armstrong in the cycling, and he's absolutely slammed for it. And we've got the sport boxing where people literally put their lives on the line, and the punishment is sometimes pay this fine, miss a couple of fights. It's disgraceful. I think they've just got to be out of the sport. It's such a dangerous game to play. It's unfair.
You only got something to say?
Yeah, I mean, you're generally encouraged to make statements like a human life counts for something like Joe's saying, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I think also the point I would make is that, you know, people allow convicted rapists to come back and box. So is drug taking worse than that? I'm not sure. There's got to be consistency.
Yeah, but then that's antics outside of the ring.
A nonce.
Wait,
let's debate that out.
I agree with Jim. You have to have consistency with rapists and with cheats. Where are we going with this?
The problem is, it's very difficult where you draw the line. So if you basically said anyone who's a convicted criminal cannot box, boxing would cease to exist.
But where I disagree with that, because that's antics outside of the ring. Whereas the drug taking, when we're talking about performance enhancement drugs, that is specifically assigned to the ring. The
real story is, how does he keep getting caught? And in the same way, even if you want to draw parallels with a Tyson, again, lots of people are in the spotlight are accused of rape. Very, very few are convicted. Tyson was convicted. There's a whole story around that conviction, as well as a whole story around, you know, what like you mentioned about Povetkin and Pacquiao. I mean, people like that, where there's lots of suspicion, or they've actually been caught. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's what you're saying about who's getting caught. Sorry, Mike, but
yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Do you lot think that everyone in boxing is pretty much taking some form of performance enhancement drug? I think a lot of people probably say they are. But it's just ways of not getting caught.
No comment.
Exactly. There we go.
Get the podcast taken down straight away.
Look.
It's just whether or not you get caught. So
if it does get taken out, fine, because really, steroid abuse and fights that don't happen are the story of boxing. Really, in many ways.
It's the only headlines we're getting at the moment in terms of boxing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it does seem, going on what Johan was saying a little bit, mentioning the name of Povetkin, and I think there's other names, maybe Canelo has been speculation. I think that's the big word, Manny Pacquiao, speculation. Yeah. Does it seem that people have come down harder on Gerald Miller recently? It does seem like they're almost making an example out of Gerald Miller, because everyone's straight away saying he's got to be banned for life. That's the first kind of talk I've really heard in terms of being tested for PEDs, but maybe that's just because he's done it twice in a row.
Timing hasn't helped him, let's be honest. His last two fights in a row. And
yeah, that's pretty fucking stupid.
Yeah, he hasn't done himself any favors with the short distance in which he's been convicted of the failure of the drug tests. But it's a difficult one, because every big name in boxing has been linked to it. And I think the problem is because you've got so many governing bodies, you don't have a consistent way in which to test these boxers. I think that's you know, we'll talk about this a bit more when we go on to the debate about UFC and boxing, but having so many governing bodies means there's so many different rules and regulations. You've got the US and their testing, the UK and their testing, and, you know, all the big heavyweights, certainly in Britain, Anthony Joshua, Dillian Whyte, you know, they've all been tarred with that brush. And until you have, you know, an internationally recognized regulator like you do in athletics, I think we're always going to have issues with this, and people's legacies are always going to be tainted by it until we have a better structure in place.
Also, the way it's reported is confusing. With the Dillian Whyte example, it was reported that he was a drugs cheat, and then it seemed to go away, but I don't know if it was ever really clear about why that had gone away and why he was no longer a drugs cheat. What had happened in the testing that meant that he could go on and continue.
Yeah, that was a really weird one and quite harsh on Dillian Whyte.
But most of them are.
Yeah, but that was quite harsh because, as you say, in the media, it was presented Dillian Whyte is a drugs cheat, and the next thing you know, we're seeing him on a card in Saudi Arabia fighting Marius Wack, and
he's on like Ready Steady Cook or something.
It was on MasterChef.
Whatever it was, MasterChef. That was it.
But I think
sorry, Joe,
with the whole drug sheets, I think a lot of the sort of politics of boxing sort of spills over into it, and I think you see that with the Dillian Whyte thing there. You got certain agendas, and I think they're pushed through this medium of drug scandals with the different bodies, like Jimmy was saying.
The other thing underlying it as well is that, I mean, they're looking for the great American hope, aren't they? They haven't got any great American heavyweights at the moment. And they got people like Miller. They're probably a bit embarrassed. So when he fucks up like that, they probably want to really stick it to him because they're pissed off that they got no great heavyweights at the moment.
Yeah. Also, I think when you put yourself up against, you know, the golden boy, Anthony Joshua, people are going to always want to slam you if you've gone in there to hurt him illegally or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But if you watch Dillian Whyte on YouTube talking about AJ's steroid use.
Yeah, I've seen that.
That's quite a funny one.
Yeah, that is funny.
But the last thing I say on the Gerald Miller topic before we move on a little bit, it does seem a little bit weird with Miller in a sense where he's obviously taken drugs before he fought AJ, which was, you can kind of understand because you know, I think most of us would. Steroids probably wouldn't be my drug. Yeah, steroids probably wouldn't be my drug of choice.
Steroids in the pints, dropping steroids in the pints, and then down
maybe a Xanax as well, something like that to just but
Xanax after.
But he's taken steroids before he fights AJ. Kind of understandable, but at the same time, huge chance of him getting caught. And he misses out on possibly the biggest payday of his life, where he could have walked away with a lifetime sum of money. So already a bit funny, but you can understand it. But then to take drugs again against a journeyman, or, you know, no offense to him, but a veteran like Forrest or whatever, none of us really heard of him, to beat someone like that, it makes you think, and especially when the whole limelight is going to be on you, everyone's watching you, everyone's going to be seeing whether you're going to cheat again. It just seems a bit funny, almost like he's done it purposely to fail on purpose.
Yeah, is it a
way out? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if
I think the other thing, Michael, that could be his whole career, he's relied upon these performance-enhancing drugs, and he's never fought in the spotlight. So he actually cannot, you know, train or get himself motivated or get himself into a certain shape without them. Yeah. But it's only recently that he's come to prominence that he's actually been, you know, tested to a high degree, and he has no other option. So it could just be that he has no choice. He's just not capable of doing it without them.
I suppose the bonus for him as well, he still hasn't got a loss on his record. If you go on BoxRec, he's still actually undefeated. So, you know, he's actually.
He'll be telling that to his grandkids. He'll miss out the failed drug test, but.
All right. Anyway, let's move off Gerald Miller and on to our boy, the body snatcher, Dillian Whyte. We can't go a podcast without mentioning his name. We have to talk about him, but. For this time, we're not just going to love him up. He is actually in the headlines, and we actually do have a reason to talk about him. And it's come out that he's recently split with his trainer, Mark Tibbs. These two got together. Well, it kind of sounds like I'm telling a love story right now, but no. These two got together after Whyte's loss to AJ back in 2015. And Whyte hasn't actually lost a fight since he's been coaching him. So all that way through, he's beaten big names like Parker, Rivas, Chisora twice, etc. But the split is said to be an amicable one. So it's all to do with the fact that Whyte's been out in Portugal training, and Tibbs has got a family back in the UK, a young family, and he's also got a gym there. So they're claiming on Instagram, this is all I've seen from Whyte, that it's amicable terms and for practical reasons, that it's just not been working out. But Jim, over to you. Do you think this is going to have a great impact on Whyte's upcoming fight against Povetkin? Surely this is going to be, it's only a month away and you're splitting with your trainer.
Yeah, I don't really buy the excuse, Mike. No one puts their family before boxing. That's complete nonsense. But in answer to your question, yeah, I do think this does create problems for Whyte. He's been on an immense run, barring his last fight, which was a bit unconvincing. You know, he's got some impressive victories on his record since joining up with him. So Povetkin's a very dangerous fighter. You know, we spoke about it in the last podcast. Only 2 defeats are against AJ and Klitschko. He's got a great pedigree at heavyweight. He's dangerous. He's got an awesome left hook. So it's a dangerous fight for Whyte. You know, he's reaching the pinnacle, Whyte. You know, he's due that title shot any day now. So it's a dangerous fight for him. So I do worry for him. I think ultimately my gut is telling me he'll pull through, but it's not long until that fight. So it's a strange time to split with your trainer.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I think. I can't see it being an amicable split, as you've put it. Sounds like the whole break up with your missus, we'll still be friends sort of thing. It doesn't really make sense to me. It's one of the biggest fights of his career to date, and he split with the man that's been very successful for him. These kids haven't popped out of nowhere. He would have had them before. He would have known when he took the fight. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. It doesn't quite add up.
And why was he out in Portugal? Why was he out in Portugal without his trainer training anyway? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Obviously, because of coronavirus now, but apparently Whyte went out to Portugal.
They got a big steroid scene there.
Yeah.
What I like about it is they sound like a children's book. It's like, and Mr. Tibbs said to Dillian, let's go to Eddie Hearn's house and smash his face in. Oh, Mr. Tibbs.
Yeah, those two are
wearing those little satchels as well. When you sometimes you see when they got those little satchels and everything. I think it's really sad because when going back to when we were talking about the steroid allegations, I remember seeing Tibbs and the way that he was upset at the allegations. You could see there's a real warmth. There was a real warmth and a genuine warmth between the two of them. So it's a pity.
Yeah, I worry for Whyte a little bit because I think under Tibbs, I'd definitely say he's probably the most improved heavyweight in that division.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Like if you look at him in that AJ fight, you know, he's raw. He's got talent. There's something there, but a lot of it needed to be honed and a lot of work needs to be done. And I think he's come a long way with Tibbs. And I think all of us have seen a lot of interviews with them too. They seemed like they had a good relationship. You know, it was like the Cockney and the Yardie. It was like it was a bit of a funny mix. Like they were nice.
That's what we'll call the children's book.
That's
Cockney
the children's book.
Yeah, there we go.
Love it.
But yeah, personally, as I agree with Jimmy, I'm a bit worried for Whyte going into this Povetkin fight. I think, there's been a lot going on for Whyte at the moment. Difficult fight against Whack. Then the scandal with the drugs, and then
just the whole title shot thing as well, man. How long?
The whole title shot thing. The days going on, and I just think often, with people, they're waiting for that title shot, and when it seems like they're just about to get that number one goal that Whyte's been looking for, it just gets pulled away from them. The rug gets pulled under their feet, and it kind of falls apart. And I don't know. I hope he gets through Povetkin, but it's going to be a difficult fight. But we'll see what happens there. We'll see what happens. Not long now, as we said. But let's get into the last kind of part of our podcast now. We've spoken a bit about Gerald Miller, spoken about Dillian Whyte. Now we are looking at the hot topic at the moment, whether MMA, or I think we're going to be talking more specifically about the UFC here, whether the UFC is overtaking boxing. Now, in the UFC, the best really do fight the best. That's the kind of the main talking point for the UFC for why it is better than boxing. If we just look at their upcoming card, I think this is about a week away. they've got 3 title fights on that card. And within those 3 title fights, there's a big fight between Masvidal and Usman. And obviously, I think all of us follow a little bit of UFC, but we're mainly boxing fans. But even we can tell that these are big names fighting in a big card. And then you look at boxing, and, you know, in boxing, you've got 4 top heavyweights, all got a chance to beat each other. You know, you've got Whyte, Wilder, AJ, Fury. And I think we've all said that on their day, one of those fighters could beat another. And yet we've only seen 2 of those fighters fight each other. We've only seen Fury versus Wilder.
No, well, we saw AJ Whyte, but I guess
we saw AJ Whyte a long time ago. That's a fair play.
Yeah, well, when Whyte was barely a contender, in as much as a lot of the best fights happen because you get the feeling that the promoters don't think that anything is going to happen. Like they put their fighter in with someone where they expect a certain result, and it's just great for the fans.
I think he barely even.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. You know, and I think you know sometimes the best fights that we've seen are ones where the promoters aren't actually expecting that to happen. I get that feeling with boxing. But whereas you know, the one thing that boxing has got, I mean, it's got things like the Queensberry rules, whereas UFC, they're fucking savages. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Look, I'm a passionate boxing fan, and I've always preferred boxing to UFC, but I can feel the sands of change, and UFC is on the rise. And that's just simply because you get the best fighters fighting in their prime. There's less politics. There's less promoters just trying to exploit people and make money. And there's no...
And I mean,
sorry, go on.
Even with Dana White, I mean, Dana White presents himself as a fan. He's wearing a T-shirt. He's wearing jeans. He's saying, you know, he wants the best to fight the best, which is what any fan would say. He runs it like that, and I think you're right. In that sense, they have the competitive edge against boxing.
Yeah, you've got one, you know, every division has got one true champion, and that's the way it should be. And you haven't got loads of weight that, you know, boxing is getting a bit farcical. You've got these catch weights where there's like 5 pounds difference. It's just ridiculous. You know, UFC, the fights are more competitive. The problem is you've just got too many governing bodies in boxing, and UFC, it's all under one roof, it's all under one house. And it's a real threat to boxing. And these governing bodies, they need to make some drastic changes, or UFC, mark my words, will take over.
Yeah. Do you think there's a problem? Do you think there's a problem as well in terms of its popularity, particularly with the American audience, where most of the champions that we're talking about at the moment aren't American? I mean, you've got 2 British heavyweights, and the 2 best heavyweights in the world. And I mean, you know, the only Americans that know that the UK exists are ones that think they're related to the Queen, right? They're not like it must have an impact. I mean, if we look at some of the other divisions, like light heavyweight, I mean, you can't even, if you're not to be too disrespectful to Americans, but I imagine they can't pronounce most of the names. I know that I can't pronounce most of the names of some of the champions in light heavy, etc. That must be a problem for its popularity. But I think what I like about UFC is they're not precious with their champions. They're not precious with their Conor McGregors. They can get their faces bashed in, and that's just a part of the whole scene. Ronda Rousey's a good example. She wasn't protected, was she? She's just put in the octagon, and she either wins or she loses, and that's it. There's no.
I think that's where the boxing culture started to go wrong a little bit, and I think it was mainly after the kind of the Floyd era of the 50-0, and so much was made of that 0 that in the UFC, when you speak to their kind of fans, there's not that culture of being undefeated. They don't care about that. They care about seeing, you know, you can be a popular fighter in UFC if you just put on a good show, even if you've lost nearly all your fights. It's a matter of fighting the best and putting on a good show. It is, I think, they're understanding the idea of entertainment. Like, the UFC is entertainment. And I just worry with boxing. It's like, you know, we spoke about last week, Ryan Garcia versus Luke Campbell. That fight's not going to happen. Ryan Garcia is a young guy like that who's got 1 million followers on Instagram is not going to be put in with like a monster like Luke Campbell, who no one in America knows. And it's been ordered by the WBC. It's been ordered by the WBC, and we're still not going to see it. Like, that's how much of a joke the sport can be at times. Do you know what I mean? But
I mean, it's
annoying.
It's
maybe it's the sort of thing that you're talking about, that the fighters themselves have a lot more pulling power because they're not all governed under the same body. And whilst that is a sort of pro of UFC, Jimmy mentioned it about like the exploitation of boxers. I actually think the MMA fighters are more exploited, and they're sort of thrown in there time after time, no matter what. You're going to fight him because this is the 10-fight deal that you've made. And yeah, it makes for better entertainment. But if we're going to talk about it on perhaps a more sort of moral level, does that make it a superior sport?
If we were going to talk about on a moral level, we just wouldn't be watching boxing or UFC.
That's a good point. For me, UFC started winning me over when they introduced the baddest motherfucker belt. Like that's the moment. That's the catalyst.
It's for the fans. That's what they want to see. They don't care about
Mayweather, as you mentioned,
or whatever.
You mentioned Mayweather.
Yeah.
I mean, that says it all, doesn't it? That Mayweather fights for Mayweather. It's all about Mayweather and about he chooses to fight an opponent, etc. He's in complete control. Whereas with UFC, you get the feeling that more that the fans are in control.
Yeah, it seems with the UFC, for the fans it's better, but for the fighters it's not. And it's the other way around with boxing. Boxers are making triple the amount of UFC fighters. I think, I've mentioned him before, but I already just mentioned him. But Ryan Garcia, I think he probably makes similar to a world champion in UFC. Like,
he laughed at that 200 grand paycheck, didn't he? And he told him to fuck off.
Stuff like that.
Wow.
I think another way the UFC is overtaking as well is I think they're creating superstars. There's not a lot of superstars really coming out of boxing in the recent years. Like in the UFC, you've had Ronda Rousey. That's a woman as well, and in a combat sport, being on the face of video games. That's incredible. That's a huge move. Then you've got Conor McGregor. Every single person in the world knows who that is. Now you've got this Masvidal, who's rising and stuff like that. And it seems the list seems to continue. I know we have those in boxing. But in boxing, it seems to be more you're rated in terms of just purely your ability inside the ring, not necessarily your character outside the ring.
I think as well, UFC transcends weight categories. We know that the media are obsessed with heavyweight. Everyone wants to know the boxing heavyweight champion of the world. No one could tell you the bantamweight champion, etc. But in UFC, I think it's a different. Again, it's almost fairer to fighters in that sense.
I think that one of the reasons for that, Johan, is because there are far less weight categories in UFC.
Yeah.
I think what it feels like at the moment is UFC is on the rise, but I think a lot of that you can contribute to the fact that they've continued to fight during lockdown, whereas boxing's been put on hold. So I think they feel quite relevant at the moment, because when you're reading about fighting at the moment, there's very little happening in boxing because no fights are taking place. Whereas UFC, they're not just laying on shows, they're laying on some serious fights. Yeah. And again, it's just shifting the balance of power in their favor.
Yeah, that seems to be another way in which the UFC are kind of leading the line for combat sports. And you're looking at them, and ages ago, they put on their first world title fight, which I think was Ferguson versus Gagey or something like that. And that was a huge success. And they did that a while ago, but it's only really coming, I think our first major event in terms of UK boxing is going to be the 22nd of August. And, you're looking at that card, and it's good for boxing standards, but it doesn't blow your head off. Do you know what I mean? It's
look, I have booked 2 weeks off work, the week before and the week after, but even
just
so, it's a week to prep and then a week.
I can't fucking wait.
But I know what you mean.
I like how they wheel out Carl Frosch and people like that to talk about how exciting the card is. And it's like, fuck off.
I didn't know he was German, Johan. He was a Carl Frosch.
Well, he's Polish, isn't he? He's Polish.
There you go.
I forgot the name of the person who I really meant. Oh, what's his name?
Paulie Malignaggi.
No, not him.
He's the best.
Johnny Nelson.
Well, all of you could say any of them, right? They all get wheeled out and get their paycheck to say how great Eddie Hearn's and Sky Sports, etc.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us nicely to the end of this podcast, actually. I think there's definitely a lot boxing can learn from UFC, but the sport is definitely not overtaking it just yet. But thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you guys for taking part. Would you guys like to say goodbye?
Goodbye, boxing. It's over. Watch UFC.
Yes, listen to Joe Rogan. You're wasting your time with this podcast. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. Tune in next week, and I think we're going to be taking a little look at Dubois versus Joe Joyce, which is a really exciting fight. But before we get into another tangent about that, I'll let you guys go. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.